This is a Guide Your Light network production, creating podcasts with purpose.
If you keep comparing yourself to other people, you will never be happy.
I've yet to find anything the mortal body can experience that the mortal soul can't love. I have yet to find anything that somebody's been through that can't be turned into a fuel of opportunity.
I say we never arrive at anything. I'm never going to arrive and say, I am now the most incredible leader of all time. We are on this journey of learning. And as we grow, we learn.
Anybody here listening has taken psychedelics will know that there is no control. And the whole point is letting go and leaning in. And that's scary. But that's the scary is where the healing happens.
It's not just about food. We're still not seeing results because there's a shift of mindset that needs to happen.
You get knocked down, you got to get back up. And so part of that process is having a broken heart. You need to talk about feelings. But generally, most men, if they're not having a broken heart, they don't need to talk about feelings. And this is where psychology has misled us.
Hey everybody, I'm Maritza Barone, and this is the Things You Can't Unhear podcast. Has there ever been a moment in your life where you heard or read or were told something that you simply could not unhear? Something that caused you to make positive changes so that you could become the best version of yourself? Well, we share this show with access to inspiring and empowering humans who will motivate you to become the happiest, healthiest, kindest, and most compassionate you. Sit back, settle in, and let this be the day you hear something that simply cannot be unheard. This episode was one of those conversations that stopped me in my tracks. There was such a powerful presence that our guest had that had me captivated from the very beginning. His name is Kute Blackson, and he's a transformational speaker and national best-selling author of You.Are.The.One and his latest book, The Magic of Surrender, which is what we delve into a lot today. I don't say transformational lightly in this sense because Kute is someone who is altering lives for the better and allowing us to see what can be possible when we frame things differently and let go of outcomes or expectations that we have believed in for so long. Kute has a massive and growing following, and I am so excited to see how far his voice and message is going to spread through the world in the coming years. I feel so privileged to have had this conversation with him. We discuss the common misconceptions of surrender, how to learn to follow our calling and purpose path in life, why letting go of certain expectations can open up brand new possibilities, how we can look at illness and disease with a different lens, and the big one, the meaning of life. Topics I could literally talk about all day long. So I hope you get as much out of this conversation as I did. Now, before you hear the episode, please hit subscribe on the Things You Can't Unhear podcast, either on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify or any of your listening platforms. It will ensure you are the first to know next time an episode drops, and it really helps to support the show in the very best way. Enjoy this conversation, and as always, let me know what you think. Welcome, Kute Blackson, to the Things You Can't Unhear podcast.
Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited about this conversation. As a podcaster and, being around for 4 years, I get a lot of emails in my inbox about potential interviews and people that I should have on the show. And when I received the information on you, it was just a heck yes. So recently you've released a book. It's called The Magic of Surrender. And the concept of surrender is one that I came across perhaps 5 years ago and absolutely changed the way I lived and worked. Just this morning, for example, I'm about to jump on a flight after this conversation, and the flight time changed. And usually I'd sort of get myself in a huff. I have to be in Melbourne for a shoot tomorrow at a particular time. And, everything was planned. And that spanner in the work, that flight change came through. And yes, usually I would have panicked and tried to control the situation. Now I've realized surrender into what has just happened. And that's just a small example of surrendering. But I wanted to bring that up to premise what surrender is. So firstly, can you start by telling us what surrender means to you?
Yeah, look, I think there's so many misconceptions in our culture today on what surrender is and what surrender isn't. This idea that surrender is weak, that surrender is passive, that surrender is giving up, that surrender is waving the white flag, that if you surrender, you're going to get left behind, you're going to be a doormat, you're going to be a victim, you're going to be taken advantage of, that you won't manifest your goals, dreams, and desires, that if you surrender, you're going to get less in life, which doesn't really inspire us to want to surrender. And so what I'm actually saying is, like, if you really understand I want to reframe surrender from a passive idea to an active, inspiring thing, that if you really understand the real essence of what surrender is, like, what if you didn't get less in life, but you got more? Maybe not what you thought, maybe not what you thought you wanted or expected, but perhaps what you really needed. And so surrender is a letting go of control, or I should say the illusion that we were in control in the first place. Surrender is when we stop trying to force and manipulate life to fit our limited idea, our ego's limited idea of how we think it should be and how we think life should be and how we think things should look and who we think we should be. And when we take the limitations off of life and we're open and available to life showing us, to the highest unfolding of what is seeking to happen in any given moment. And so I really think that surrender is the most powerful thing that we can do as human beings. Surrender is the real secret to real manifestation. If you look at the great ones, whether it's Jesus, whether it's Buddha, whether it's Gandhi, whether it's Mandela, whether it's Martin Luther King, whether it's Mother Teresa, whether it's Bruce Lee, whether it's Muhammad Ali, at some point, they all surrendered themselves to life. They all surrendered themselves to that purpose that was bigger than what they could have imagined for themselves. They all surrendered themselves to the divine, the universe, the infinite intelligence, to their soul. They surrendered themselves to a deeper impulse of life that was seeking to express through them. And I think in that surrender, they were able to transcend their own human limitations, and they tapped into another dimension of life. And in that surrender, they transcended, and life began to manifest through them. Life began to flow through them. And I think that's when you see the magic of surrender and the possibility of surrender. And so for me, the old paradigm or the old way of living and creating and manifesting is sort of the ego-based model of living life, which is all about get clear on what you want, know what you want, go make it happen, push it, force it, hustle, which is great. It does work to a degree, but in certain ways it can be limiting, because when we're creating from the perception or the filter of the ego is conditioned by past experiences. And so on some level, we're not able to see all the infinite possibilities of what is seeking to happen in any given moment. And many times we try to force things to happen, or force things that we think we want to happen, and then we manifest it only to realize what we thought we wanted was not what we really wanted. It was just what we thought we wanted based on who we thought we were. And so often our goals and dreams can be projections of unmet needs from, let's say, childhood, as an example. And so when I talk about surrender, it's a different question. I call it an infinite question, an infinite game. You're no longer like getting clear and getting super like specific and getting attached to this idea of it's got to be this. You can set goals, no problem. But the question in surrender is a bit different. It's really about asking, what is it that life is seeking to express through me? What is it that the universe, what is it that God, what is it that this infinite intelligence, what is my soul seeking to manifest? And tuning into that, discerning, aligning, then you can sort of bring your mind and your logic and your personality and your ego and your planning and your goal setting and your structure and your marketing in alignment with what the highest soul expression is. Then I think you're in flow. Then we're working in harmony with nature. And then take action, give 100% without attachment to the outcome. And so surrender is an openness, it's an availability, it's a receptivity, it's allowing life to lead you.
You're right. And, you know, you look at Muhammad Ali and you mentioned him. It's if you want to become a world-renowned boxer and you know, or a world-renowned speaker or whatever it is, you're not saying sit back and just wait for it to come to you. It's a matter of intention. It's a matter of allowing. It's a matter of planting particular seeds and then sitting back and allowing.
Yeah, look at Muhammad Ali. Here's a guy that was on track as perhaps the greatest boxer of his generation, a world champion. But then this Vietnam War came along. A lot of people, some people know the story, some people don't. But this is what I think made him iconic, because here's a man who was on track. He made this intention, this plan, and that he chose to not fight in the war, which meant he had to give up his belt. And that took him in a whole different direction. And I would propose, like, had he not done that, he took a stand for what he felt was true. He took a stand for that authentic integrity and alignment of his own soul's knowing. To me, that is surrender. And that's not always an easy path. That's not a passive path to sit down and do nothing. He felt something and he said, this is what's true. I'm going to go in this direction. And that takes a lot of courage. And so sometimes surrender might mean you work harder than you've ever worked because you are committed to a calling, a purpose, a cause, a book, a business, something that is a bigger commitment than your own sort of fears and insecurities and self-comfort and self-preservation. It's like, for me, as an example, I actually don't enjoy the process of writing. I've written 2 best-selling books, but I really don't enjoy the process. I'd rather be out swimming in the ocean or having fun with friends. And every time I have to sit my ass down and make myself, like literally make myself right. And that's a surrender. So surrender is often to not just follow the fleeting mood or emotion in the moment, but being committed to that deeper intentionality of your own soul. And that takes a deep surrender.
I can imagine that. And you know, your life, your career, your purpose now, your path that you are on has changed over time, hasn't it? But you've always had that underlying knowingness of where you're supposed to go. I'd love you to share your story of how you got to where you are now.
Wow, that's we might need a 17 podcast episode for that, but I'll do my best to kind of condense it. I was born in Ghana. My father's from Ghana. My mother's Japanese. I grew up in London. I live in the US now. I feel like a citizen of the world, from everywhere and nowhere. But from a very young age, I always felt people very deeply. I was a very empathetic kid, so I would feel people's pain. And I think there was a part of me that wanted to always alleviate suffering in some way. And so I was always trying to help people, and I was very empathetic towards people and their feelings. And I didn't know what that would look like, but I think my childhood was a bit unusual, although I thought it was normal. I thought everybody had my childhood. And I think it set the foundation for my life, in that, like, my first memories as a young boy, as a kid, around 6, 8, 7, was I remember being lost in the crowd and seeing a crippled woman crawling on the floor. She picks up the sand, the gravel that this man walks on, wipes it on her face and stands up. And so week after week, I grew up seeing blind people see and deaf people hear, and literally people standing up out of wheelchairs. The stuff you see in the movies and, you know, the internet, and you wonder, like, television, is this real? I literally grew up seeing it every day, every other day, every weekend. Same man whose gravel she picked up would look at a woman in a wheelchair and say, stand up, you're not sick. What? Like, he would touch them and say, be healed, and this miracle would happen. Or a person would come in to see him with crutches, and they hadn't walked in 5 years, and he would say, hey, throw your crutches away, you're not sick. And he would touch them and they would be healed. And it felt kind of normal. I didn't think anything unusual, because this is all I knew, until I spoke to some of my friends and my teachers about it, and they thought, this is a bit strange. And so I grew to appreciate this. This man was my father, and he built about 300 churches in Ghana, West Africa, a huge church in London, had hundreds of thousands of followers who were part of his congregation. He was a very spiritual man. So in that sense, it was a blessing, because he went to India in the 60s and had a kind of enlightenment experience. And so I grew up with a very spiritual background, a mother who was Buddhist, Japanese, grew up meditating with my mother, going to church on Sundays with my father and mother. And so it was very unusual and eclectic and very different. And so from age 8, my speaking career began, and I began to speak in my father's churches. My father said, speak one day, and that's when it happened. And then when I was 14, I was ordained as a minister, literally. And that began a whole other spiritual journey. And for me, in that point in my life, I knew I wanted to help people. But when it was announced to the joy of everyone else, something didn't feel right in my soul. And yet, as a kid, as a 14-year-old kid, I didn't have the courage, and I guess I just didn't have the courage to speak my truth. Like, my fear was if I spoke my truth to everyone, if I spoke my truth to my father, then I would lose my father's love. I would be abandoned. I would be outcast. I would be alone. And I think, like many of us, I allowed fear to hijack my voice and my freedom. And I said nothing. And so for 4 years, I went through this inner turmoil of questioning and trying to negotiate in my mind, trying to fit myself into who I thought people wanted me to be in order to get love and validation and approval, which just made me more miserable. And I think the judgment day came, you could say, when I turned 18 and I had to make certain decisions about my life. And that was perhaps the first conscious moment of having to surrender, even though I didn't know that's what it was. This was a moment of surrender and a choice point where I felt a calling in my soul, like something was pulling me to come to America, to come to Los Angeles, to come to California. I wanted to go into the self-help field and write books and give seminars. And because I was sneaking to my father's office every day in the evenings, and on his bookshelf were literally thousands of self-help books. And everyone from the Eastern mystics of Krishnamurti and Osho to Wayne Dyer and Louise Hay and Jack Canfield. And so I saw that there was a whole different way of impacting people. I saw that it didn't have to be through religion or the church. And I thought, people are writing books, they're doing seminars. This is what I want to do. And so it was an epiphany. And so I felt my soul calling, and it felt so strong, as though I did not have a choice. And so I began a process of really like grieving the loss of the life that I knew, and making peace with the fact that I may never have a relationship with my father and the heartbreak of that. And that basically I renounced my life, and it was very difficult. It was very challenging. It took me 4 years of just slowly surrendering and letting go. But when I turned 18, 17 and a half, I knew what I had to do. And so I looked into my future, and I saw I could take over my father's operation and be who everybody wanted me to be. But if I didn't have my soul, if I didn't have my integrity, if I didn't have myself, if I didn't have my truth, then what kind of success is this, that you can't be truly, fulfilled and happy being someone that you're not and living someone else's life? And if I lie to myself now, I'm going to have to lie to myself for the rest of my life. And so that's when I took the plunge. I let go, and I had that conversation with my father, and we didn't speak for about 2 years after that, which was really difficult. But I knew that I was being called in a direction, and it would have been more painful to hold it back. And so, yeah, I left everything behind. Long story short, I won a green card in the green card lottery that enabled me to come to the US. And I came with 2 suitcases, $800 in my pocket, knew no one in the country, and just showed up following a dream, and went and found many of the teachers, the mentors, the authors I had read books about: Jack Canfield, Deepak Chopra, Louise Hay, Marianne Williamson. Studied with some of them, and then a few years later got to the point where I wanted more. And that's when I started traveling the world, and saved up some money and had a kind of breakdown in life at age 20, 21. And I began traveling the world. And I went to Thailand, studied with some monks, went to Israel, studied with rabbis, went to walked the Camino in northern Spain, 900 kilometers, shaved my head with a backpack, and then ended up in India. And so somehow, sort of unbeknownst to me, unintentionally, much like my father, ended up in India and had my own profound experiences there that cracked me open to another sense of who I am and the purpose of life and the nature of reality. And so that's what propelled me back to the US. And that's when I began helping people one-on-one. No idea what I was doing, but just out of the sheer intention to be of service in some way. And then my work evolved and I started to create a way of working. I called it uncoaching. And the methodology, and one person came, another person came, people started coming from around the world, and then it just expanded into small groups and large groups and larger groups and 2 books, and here we are.
And then we wait to see what amazingness comes next. That is a beautiful and fascinating story. And, you know, you obviously followed that purpose calling. Do you believe that we are all here with we are born into this world with a particular calling that we can choose to follow if we decide to do that?
Every one of us, we all have a purpose. Whether you're consciously aware of what that purpose is or not, we all have a purpose in that we're souls, you know, we're spiritual beings, and we incarnate into this human experience. To me, life is like a university, you could say, for our soul's evolution. And every experience, everything we go through, every relationship, every success, every failure, heartbreak, everything we go through is kind of like the curriculum, you know, for our soul's evolution. And so for me, if we understand that we are souls, that we incarnate into this human experience in order to learn, to grow, to evolve, everything is serving that. Every experience we go through is part of that evolutionary invitation and learning and lessons. Then at the highest level, every moment of our life and the entire purpose of our incarnation into this human simulation is to realize who we truly are, to grow, to evolve. So evolution, you could say, and growth is our purpose, to remember what we truly are.
Had you not spoken up and done and taken that path for yourself and just followed in the footsteps that your father had wanted,
and maybe become successful, right?
And of course, then what happens at the end of this life experience in your mind? What happens in your beliefs where hasn't been potentially fulfilled? Do we have the opportunity to start again?
Yeah, that's why I think we have to say, well, what is success? Because so often we're taught that we're just this mind, this body, this ego structure. That's it. And success is very one-dimensional. It's very much on the goal line. You achieved, you didn't achieve. You started this thing and you grew it to this level. You're a gazillionaire, you're a success. But if you're miserable in the process, if you're not growing in the process, if you're not fulfilling your true self in the process, if you're not evolving and becoming more of who you are and learning the lessons that perhaps you're meant to learn along the way, but you succeeded and won the Oscar, made all this money, like, is that really a success? If you stay in a relationship and you're both freaking miserable and unhappy and driving each other crazy, and you're not growing and evolving, and none of you are becoming more of who you truly are, but you stay together for 100 years, is that truly success? Truly, if you're not evolving. And so I think we have learned to see, we've been conditioned to see life on a very one-dimensional level, the goal line, but we forget the soul line. And so for me, I would just say that if life is a school and everything is part of the curriculum, all lessons are repeated until learned, at least for sure in this lifetime. And if there is, let's say there is, I don't know, we can't prove it. I mean, I sense there might be, but if there is another thing, as let's say other lifetimes, and we reincarnate and that the soul just evolves into another dimension in another lifetime, then sure, maybe the possibility that we come back in a different experience, different body, different personality, with the same energetic lessons that we need to learn in the next classroom that is life in this human experience, as a possible metaphor, as a possibility. Can I prove it? No. Can it be scientifically proven? No. But symbolically, metaphorically, I think there are many spiritual traditions that have spoken to that, possibility. But I would just say, even in this lifetime, we can live many lifetimes in this lifetime as we grow and evolve and shed identities and shed ego and shed belief structures. As we evolve, we become more than we were. As we evolve, we tap into a deeper dimension of our truth and have the possibility to completely reinvent ourselves and die to who we were and be born again, so to speak, to the more authentic version of ourselves. So in that sense, we can live multiple lifetimes in just this one lifetime, you know? And I think that's part of the freedom to not be stuck in an old version of oneself, because the next level of our life, whatever it is, if everyone thinks about that next level, the next level of your life, the next level of relationship, the next level of abundance, the next level of prosperity, the next level of purpose, the next level of what contribution, the next level of your life requires the next level of you. The next level of you will require that you let go of who you were. You cannot manifest the new being the old version of yourself. And it will require that you let go of who you were. That's a surrender, the idea of who you were. And it requires that you let go of everything and perhaps everyone that is no longer a vibrational match. But that can feel a bit scary for the ego. And so what we tend to do is hold on to what we know, hold on to what's comfortable, hold on to who we were out of comfort and self-preservation and fear, and that just keeps us stuck. And so in many ways, our holding on to who we were previously and what we've been and what we know about ourselves is what blocks that next level of manifestation. And so then we keep cycling, repeating the same experiences, the same lessons, the same situations over and over again. Different person, different relationship, different place. You know, you can change your hairstyle, you can change your clothes, you can change your university, you can change your apartment, you can change your car, you can change your socks, you can change your eye color, many things. But the bottom line, you can't run away. We can't run away from ourselves and the lessons that we are here that we incarnate in order to learn and grow through and evolve through. And we will face those in situations and people and relationships that we draw to us.
I love that. When you frame it in that way, for people who are hearing this for the first time and, you know, have their minds blown by the perspective of what life now can look like with this different lens, it changes everything.
It's a different lens. So for instance, like, you know, like if you're going through, when you really look at life from a soul, let's call it soulistic, I'm just making up words, but soulistic, cellular viewpoint, right? It's a different lens. So when you go through some stuff, heartbreak, shit falls apart, that thing doesn't happen, plans fall apart, the plane is delayed, you know, some dis-ease and illness, difficulty, hard times. On one level, that goal line, one-dimensional level, it seems horrible, right? And when we just stay on that level, it's easy to move into resistance, upset. We tend to contract, collapse, complain, feel cursed. And then we feel like a victim and we then get disempowered, right? That's one way of going through life, which many of us, I've been there, we go through life that way. And then we stay stuck. But the other way to start shifting, and this is part of surrender, is rather than resist an experience, you surrender to it and say, okay, this is happening. Acceptance leads to surrender. This is happening. I'm not feeling well. I'm going through this hard time. Shit's falling apart. Things aren't working out. My lover left me. I'm heartbroken. And part of surrender is the open-hearted participation with the process of life that is happening. To say, okay, this is happening. But how do we move into that open-hearted participation? When you realize you're a soul, you start looking at life and shift your perspective. It changes how you relate to life. Life may not change, but it changes how you relate to life. And when you change how you relate to life, that's when you can change life, because you show up and act differently and respond differently. Then when you're going through something, you can ask yourself, why have I attracted this experience? And what is my soul seeking to learn from this experience? What is it that I'm seeking to understand from this job situation, with my boss, with my coworker, in this romantic relationship? Like, what is my soul seeking to learn? Because I think when we learn the lesson, where we are, when we are, with who we're with, that's the key to unlock the lock to the next level of experiences. And many times we don't realize we are blocking our manifestation to that next level because we haven't learned what we need to learn where we are. We haven't learned that sort of soul, spiritual, emotional, mental, karmic lesson where we are. But when we learn it, that shifts our energy, then we tap into another dimension of ourselves, and we become more. And when we become more, then we start attracting that next level of situation and experience that is a vibrational match for who we are.
And then that lesson doesn't need to be relearned.
Or if it shows up, because
we have the
learned
tools,
we're able to say, don't have to go into that dish again. Don't have to. Here's the thing. Sometimes when you learn a lesson, there's two things I'll say. Sometimes when you learn a lesson, or let me back up. Sometimes when you're very, very close to a breakthrough to the next level, you will attract what I call a transcendence test. You will attract a situation, an energy, a person, or go through something within yourself that is a energy of the past that will test you to see, will you take that same old pattern? Will you collapse and cave? Will you fall into that addiction? Will you choose that old toxic relationship that person is kind of showing up to give you the opportunity? Because in those moments, we have the opportunity to choose differently. When we choose differently, we begin to transcend. When we choose differently, we begin to graduate. When we choose differently, we begin to repattern our nervous system. When we choose differently, we begin to repattern our way of relating to the situation, which then unhooks us from that energy so that we can move into that next level. So just in case someone is like, but I thought I learned the lesson and the same, stuff is showing up again. Why is this? Sometimes it's because you're actually very, very close to the next level.
Grab a pen, everyone, and write that down. Choose differently. That is huge. I'm going to post note that and put that up because it's such a great reminder of every time you're about to slip, you're about to have a conversation that doesn't align with you. You're about to have a catch up with people that don't align with you. You're about to say yes to an opportunity that doesn't align with you. Choose differently. Tap in and choose differently. I love that. That's a huge takeaway for me. It's something I can't unhear. Taking a quick minute to interrupt this conversation to let you know about something exciting I am growing. As you might know, I'm incredibly passionate about helping people to find and share their voice, especially if their voice is one that aims to create positive change in others. And I've launched a podcast network with purpose. It's called the Guide Your Light Network, that features podcasts and voices that inspire, educate, and transform listeners. And we have a library of podcasts that are part of our network that truly embody that mission, and we're looking for more. If this has sparked interest in you and you are ready to start exploring speaking and using your voice in this way, I'd love for you to check it out. Also, if you have something important to say and you don't know where to start to bring that to life, we can also help you to craft your authentic message through our Guide Your Light online sessions to help you get super clear on your intention, messaging, and structure needed to launch a podcast of your own that is authentically you. Just head over to guideyourlightnetwork.com. I want to talk about people potentially who are, you talked about dis-ease earlier, but people who are potentially experiencing illness, who are even grieving in that situation, and looking at surrender from that perspective, because, we've talked about purpose and careers and all of these wonderful things, but let's look at it from this angle. Say there's someone who has been diagnosed with something that they're, not coping with. There's an illness and they're not processing it and they're depressed. And, talk to me about that angle.
Look, first and foremost, it's challenging. I'm not going to pretend that it's easy. It's hard, being in this human experience, this human body, and facing, let's say, a disease, debilitating, life-threatening, whatever scale. It is not an easy thing. It is not casually, so I don't respond casually. It takes a lot of resilience and courage to move through something like that, especially if it's something you deal with daily. And one thing that I kind of said was, if you first really if you look at it from the perspective of being a soul, and if you look at life from the perspective of, there's two things I'll say. If you look at life from the perspective of being a soul, and everything is your curriculum, then I'm also going to propose that that experience of that disease, there's something in that that is a part of your classroom, that there's something in that that perhaps you're seeking to experience on a spiritual level, and experience, to learn, to grow from, to master. And I think if you're able to reframe it and go through it from that evolutionary learning perspective, that doesn't mean it takes away the pain or makes it easy, but it can begin to shift how you hold it. And it can begin to shift how you relate to it so that you can grow through it and learn through it to either shift it and heal it, or at least be able to find a way of holding it that might provide some space. It's like, okay, what is this teaching me? Is this teaching me to slow down? Is this teaching me more patience? Is this teaching me about self-loving? Is this like, what is this teaching me? And so that's, I think, one thing. So the holding and the perspective, I think, is really, really, really important. Many times also, I think dis-ease can sometimes be, or pain, can sometimes be the unconscious or the body's way of communicating to us. Often the things we suppress, the things we have not acknowledged, the things we've learned to shut down and not feel from childhood, growing up, in our teens, heartbreak, pain, hurt, things that really we learn to just stuff inside from a very young age. Decades of stuffing and suppressing and not feeling. Where does it go? It goes into our psyche, it goes into our body. The mind and the body is connected. And so often all of those, everything remains present inside of us until fully felt. Whatever we don't feel and release in a healthy way will often manifest in unhealthy ways. And so if we have suppressed feelings inside for a long time, the toxicity of emotion that we haven't found the way to release and healthily express, then it may eventually manifest in the form of physical pain or dis-ease. And so I say pain or dis-ease, even though it's challenging, is simply a messenger of something that is seeking attention. And usually there is some message or something that we need, that is needing our attention in the pain or disease, that if we bring our attention to, maybe the pain can dissolve, or the disease can dissolve, or we can transform our relationship with it in some way. And so it gives us an opportunity to acknowledge the feelings we haven't felt, so that we can process those feelings that we haven't felt, so that we can let go of the feelings that we haven't felt, so that that sort of unconscious suppressed feeling doesn't need to necessarily manifest in our body, in that pain or that disease in the same way. And then we can do the mental, emotional, spiritual, psychological, medical interventions and work to support us simultaneously at the same time. And so that's the second part. The last part I'll say is this. My mother, what inspired the book, The Magic of Surrender, was my mother in 2016 was diagnosed with stomach cancer, stage 4. And so I got to live this with her. And I was living in Los Angeles, still live in Los Angeles. And I began to fly back. She lived in London. So I began to fly back to London literally every month to be with my mother. And I was determined that I was going to heal her. I was determined I was going to basically make my mother well with all the alternative therapies and healing modalities. And about a few months into this process, I realized she had her own journey, she wasn't drinking the green powders and following my protocol and all the supplements I was bringing, she wasn't taking. And I realized she has her own journey, and I was getting more upset with my mom in the process of trying to help her than actually just being with her. And I thought, I'm killing the moment that I have with her, you know. And so I had to start letting go, and I had to start seeing my mother as a soul with her own journey and her own lessons to learn. Her lessons, not my lessons. I don't necessarily understand all of her lessons, but there's something that she has to go through with this. And so that freed me up to just love her, you know, and celebrate every precious moment that I had with her. And so what started out as the worst year of my life really ended up being the best year of my life, because I got to just be with my mother in her chemo, just got to be with my mother and hold her hand and take care of her. And here's what was interesting. I learned so much from my mother. And this is what inspired, I think, the Surrender book. About 7, 8 months into the process, the doctor said, look, there's nothing else we can do for you. Basically, you're going to die. So get your affairs in order. And I looked at my mother. And the first thing I said was, are you afraid? My mother, who was just a little Japanese woman, she said, very calmly, I'm not afraid, because I know I'm not just this body. This body is a temporary vehicle for my soul. That this body will die, either now or at some point. But whenever this body goes, I will be with you from the other side, because my soul, my spirit is eternal. And in knowing who she really was, she knew she was not afraid. And that was such a palpable thing. You know, it was so clear when I looked into her eyes. And then I asked my mother, look, what can I wanted to be a good son. What can I do for you? Where can I take you? Well, what do you want and what do you need in your final days? And I'm just heartbroken that the reality that I will not see my mother again at some point, that our days are numbered. And so I really wanted to be a good son. And she looked at me in the face of her mortality, like she was going. She withered away. She lost a lot of weight. Hair fell out. So it was real. And anyone can be free and happy when you get what you want, you know, but when you are about to die, it's another thing. And she looked at me and she said, there's nothing I want. There's nothing I need. The only thing I want and the only thing I need is what God wants for my life. That's it. And it hit me. And I was crying. And I remember looking at her, and she was, this entire year, 8 months, she was in total peace, complete peace. And she wasn't in denial. She knew she was dying. She was a very emotional woman. But what I saw was she wasn't attached to living. She wasn't attached to dying. She was surrendered. You know, she was truly embodying acceptance and surrender. Surrender as a highest level of that trajectory. She was surrendered to the highest unfolding and journey for her soul. She was surrendered. And in that surrender, she was free. You know, in that surrender, she was at peace. And that was her freedom. And so that's what I saw as a possibility of surrender in terms of living life. And so the other thing I'll say is, you know, if you're facing a disease, first, I don't want to say you have to, but one phase is coming into acceptance, because this is what it is. There's pain. This is what it is. In this moment, doesn't mean it'll be that way forever, but this is what it is. It is what it is. But acceptance doesn't mean surrender. So first, you can't change something if you're resisting it, truly. And you won't be at peace if you're cursing it and like it shouldn't. The key to suffering is the experience that I'm having is not the experience I should be having. I should be having some other experience than the experience I'm having right now. Instant suffering. If you're feeling great, you want to make yourself feel miserable, just play that tape in your mind. The experience I'm having is not the experience I should be having. I should be having some other experience than the experience I'm having right now. There shouldn't be traffic. It shouldn't be this way. It shouldn't be that way. I shouldn't be. But if you can bring yourself to, this is what it is. I don't like it. I'm mad. I'm mad at God. I'm angry, but it is what it is. Let me just start there. Then you can get into relationship with it to see, okay, how do I navigate this now? So acceptance. Surrender is that open-hearted participation. The reason why people sometimes don't get to true surrender is because they miss, and here's the key, they miss the phase in the middle. And the phase in the middle that many of us miss, and I have been there, is grieving. Grieving is the portal, the bridge to true, authentic surrender. Because surrender is a letting go. Surrender is a death of an idea, an identity, a phase of one's life, how we think it should be. Surrender is a letting go. It's a death. And to truly surrender, to say, okay, this is happening. I have to trust that this is happening. And I'm going to participate in this fully, the best I can, to make the most of it the best I can. We have to be willing to grieve what was, what we wanted, who we thought we were, to let the old relationship go. We have to be willing to grieve fully so that we can truly let go fully, so that we can embrace the new fully. And many times when we don't grieve, we're not able to truly surrender because a part of our heart is in the past or resisting. And so I would just invite people to sit with, what have I not allowed myself to grieve fully? And just begin there. And so those are just a few things I would say.
I wrote down another thing. This is another post-it note. You can't change something you're resisting. That is a very powerful sentence. That's something that we really need to remember as well. So thank you for bringing that. And I also thank you for giving those two perspectives on disease, because I think that's really important. When you get disease, when you become ill, there are two outcomes, obviously. One, you get better, one, you don't. And
it's real.
That's a 50% truth, right? 50% truth. You framed it in that way. And it reminded me of a podcast episode we had on the show with Francesca Pavone. And if you want to jump into that conversation, she really outlines the other side of it, where she became aware of why that disease had manifested in her body. It was literally cancer around her heart. And she realized she had created emotionally a shield to protect her heart from pain, heartbreak, whatever it was. Once she understood that, guess what happened? She started to improve and come to good health. Like you said, she was using all of the medical system as well, but doing the emotional work alongside it to make it more powerful and the healing journey much faster. And she had a 5-year checkup recently and it was all clear, and she's become a much more conscious and aware person. And it's such a beautiful story and outcome for people to see what is actually possible when you surrender to understanding and letting go of what's actually being presented in your life.
And you know, look, I am Mr. Possibility, and possibilities are what I believe. And I don't want people to think that, but if I don't heal myself from this disease, I have failed. If I'm stuck with a pain for my life, like somehow I have failed. If I die, I have failed, because everyone has a different soul lesson and journey in this life. And if life is a classroom, then we all have different lessons to learn. And for some people, you know, maybe the classroom is very intense in this life. And there might be, and sometimes the freedom and the surrender may not always be you healed. I would love it to be, right? But sometimes the real surrender is the full embrace of this teacher in your life in the form of a disease, the full embrace of this teacher and a relationship with it and an understanding of it, so that you can use it to grow and evolve, even if you are needing to manage a pain or disease for decades and decades. So I just don't want people to be like, well, if I have, something's wrong with me, or I haven't succeeded if I still have this. No, sometimes the success is like you're in a, like you go to university, someone does arts, an arts bachelor's, and someone does a freaking trigonometry, quantum physics, mind-boggling, very difficult lesson. And that can be hard. Like I went to India. I've been to India many times, but I remember I was in a train station in India my first time. And India is full of dichotomy and challenges and poverty. And, it's hard. It's hard, at least the way I did it, because I didn't do it the luxury way. I was in a train station, and I'll never forget being about 7 hours in this train station. And I saw so much in this station. And I saw a crippled man walking on the floor, literally walking on the floor. But he was like, his limbs were so deformed. He was upside down, like crawling like this, upside down, crawling on the floor, on the train station. And I looked at him and I just burst out crying, because I felt so sorry for this man and his life and his predicament. And I'll be honest, my heart was full of sympathy and pity. And I felt freaking sorry for him. Like, what the hell kind of predicament is this for a human being to live their freaking life this way? And I felt a lot of pity. And there was a moment when I just had this transcendent second when I stepped back and I saw us all as souls. And I heard this voice that said, "Kute, don't be so arrogant," feeling pity for him. And I'm like, what? Because here you are thinking that he's less in a worse situation, but maybe his soul is the more evolved one, and he's in the PhD program, and you're in the kindergarten program, because he's maybe incarnated into this simulation of life, the PhD course, and you're on level 1, because that's a real challenge. That's a real, like, to be able to find the freedom in that is another level of the simulation. And so don't feel sorry for him. See him as a soul. See him as a soul on a journey. And when you see him as a soul, you will not feel sympathy, but profound respect for the lessons that his soul is seeking to learn in this human experience. And so for me, it shifted everything to be able to see myself and others as souls, as they go through, as I go through, as we go through challenging things.
I knew this conversation was going to shift me, and it really has. It really has hit me. It's so powerful. I thank you so much for everything that you've shared. It is just truly inspiring. And, it's so important. I talk about perspective all the time, to shift that perspective and look at things a little differently, choose differently, and move differently. I want to ask you, what is something, and I'm sure there's many of them, you've had many mentors along the way, read many books, something that you could not unhear that shifted something within you to create positive change?
Wow, there've been so many moments. There've been so many that have just been seamless, but I would just say this knowing that I'm not just this body. I'm not just this personality, this physical form, that what we are is infinite beings. Simple, but the understanding of that and the experience of that for me has profoundly shifted me. Because I think when we know who we really, 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 really are, we think we're our name and our body and our form and our hair and our clothes and our skin and but when we know who we really are as infinite beings, we're free. And so much of our culture and society and advertising and media and news, they don't have an interest in you knowing who you are, because when you know who you are, you're free. You can no longer be controlled and seduced and hypnotized and manipulated, and you no longer live in fear. And so I think just knowing that when I was very young and hearing that and understanding, like, you're infinite, you're a spark of the divine, like, and being questioned, like, who are you really? That was a very profound sort of light bulb that I experienced at a young age.
And you say that it's simple, but really for so many, that's not a simple concept to understand.
Yeah.
Again, thank you so much. I will put all the links to any of your resources on the show notes so people can find you. You run retreats as well, so people can connect with you in person and feel your magic, plus the books and the speeches and the endless content that you provide to the world. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to the show. What did you think? And what did you feel? Let us know by leaving me a message on the Things You Can't Unhear Instagram community page. And if you can, give us some ratings love on your favourite listening platform.